And we are live. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Just G Live. It is another day in quarantine, another day with this whole darn coronavirus thing going on. Let me finish getting my setup set up. Make sure we are live and looking good for everybody this afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. See, we already have one viewer on the live version of this. If you are watching this after, just remember I will be streaming all of these live on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday afternoons at 5 p.m. And again, thank you for everybody who tunes in live. So, for this episode of Just G Live, we will be going to the AFC North. We've already done two other AFC divisions. We've already gone to the AFC East and the AFC South. We are making our way up north really, for the AFC North. But for right now, seeing as nobody's watching the stream right now, I'll give it a minute or so, and then we will get into kind of the basics of how last season went for the AFC North and other things like that. And if you are watching this even live or just after, this is all said and done, drop in the comment section down below or drop in the live chat just how you're doing, how you're kind of coping with all this stuff. I really want to see how other people are kind of getting along with this whole coronavirus, this whole quarantine kind of thing. I know a lot of people are missing the sports, and I'm definitely one of those people missing the sports. So, like I said, giving it about a minute, let some other people tune in, and we are going to jump into it with the AFC North, how it went last season, and then we're going to, again, break it down team by team, what they've done so far in free agency or the offseason, and then go from there. So, last season, honestly, the entire NFL, not just the AFC North, was dominated by the Baltimore Ravens. They went 14-2. I mean, come on, that record's just incredible. I mean, they were led by their quarterback, Lamar Jackson. After a not so hot rookie season, he really turned it up last year. He was great on the ground, great with his legs, just incredible to watch. And he even started to pick it up with his arm a little bit more. Pittsburgh was second in the division, just a 500 season, 8-8, did not make the playoffs in the AFC. The Cleveland Browns went 6-10, which for a lot of people, that was a pretty big disappointment for that team. They have a lot of talent up front, and they just really couldn't piece it together under new head coach Freddie Kitchens. And of course, everybody knows the Cincinnati Bengals went 2-14. They had the worst record in the NFL, and this offseason have the number one overall pick in the NFL draft. They are expected to get a new quarterback. They last season went with Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton played for the most part. Again, he just didn't have a great year. The team itself didn't have a great year. They were missing A.J. Green, their starting number one wide receiver, a really strong player. Again, he was just out with injury, so they didn't have a strong year. Obviously they didn't have a good year. I mean, they went 2-14, and they have the number one pick in the draft. And we'll kind of get into kind of how having that number one pick will affect the team next season when we kind of break down what they did this offseason so far. So to start, we will move first to Baltimore, doing this like we've done every other episode. We're going to break it down team by team. Oh, excuse me. Almost sneezed there. We're going to break it down team by team, and then we are going to go top to bottom from last season's record. And at the end of all this, we're going to kind of give some predictions on how we think the draft is going to go and kind of how next season's going to go for these teams. So, like I said, we're going to be starting in Maryland, in Baltimore. This team didn't really do much. They haven't really picked up anybody big. They got a they've upgraded their defense just a little bit, and I think that really should be scary for a lot of the rest of the NFL. So their biggest acquisition was Calais Campbell, who they picked up in a trade from the Jacksonville Jaguars. All they gave was a fifth round pick, and then they signed him on a 2-year deal with $20 million guaranteed. Honestly, for a player of Campbell's quality, especially at a pretty big position of need, you've got to think that's a great move for the Ravens. They're one of the bigger winners in this division so far as I can tell. And Campbell's kind of just their jewel in the crown. They also picked up Matt Judon. I say picked up, they re-signed him, franchise tagged Judon. Matt Skura they put a tender on him. So he was a restricted free agent. This is one of those weird kind of things. He's their starting center. They put an original round tender on him as he was a restricted free agent. So what that means is he is currently signed with the Ravens with a tender, and that means any other team has the right to sign him to a contract. The kicker is that Baltimore has the option or the ability to match that tender that contract that he signs with another team. However, because this is an original round tender, if Baltimore does not match that contract, the Ravens will not receive compensation for it. There will be no compensatory pick. There will be nothing of that. But as of right now, he is sticking with the Ravens. Re-signed as well Jimmy Smith, corner. They picked up Jihad Ward. And another big move for me, it's a 1-year deal for Derek Wolfe coming over from Denver. Now, what will be interesting is some of them players that they're losing, how they affect the offensive side of the ball for this Baltimore Ravens team. And they really did rely on their offense a lot of these games. They're still going to have Lamar Jackson, of course. He's still on his rookie contract. But they're missing Seth Roberts. Seth Roberts went down to Carolina. Tight end Hayden Hurst, who was big for the Ravens, especially in the playoffs. Offensive guard Marshall Yanda, he retired. He was getting up there, probably one of the best guards I've seen play in the NFL, especially for that period of time and that high level for such a long period of time. Offensive lineman James Hurst also went. And then on the defensive side of the ball, this is why I kind of think the amount of players that they're losing on the other end, on the defensive end, why they kind of focused on defensive players with free agency so far. And I could see them trying to work more on that defensive line, especially the front seven. They're losing 5 or 6 players, just from that front seven through free agency. So I could also see them working on that through the draft. They're losing Chris Wormley, who was traded to the Steelers. Michael Pierce went to the Vikings. Demata Pico, Patrick Onwuaser, that's a tough name, went to the Jets. Pernell McPhee, another linebacker, 2 linebackers, 3 defensive tackles, or defensive linemen, really, all left Baltimore. At least for Wormley, they got something back for him. They're probably going to try and use some of that draft capital and get another defensive player. They're also losing Brandon Carr, corner, and their safety, Tony Jefferson. So that is a lot lost on that defensive side of the ball, especially in that front seven. I mean, on Wacer, he played a lot for the Ravens. He played really well, had a lot of tackles. Same with Wormley and Pierce. The fact that Carr hasn't gone anywhere yet, as far as I know. Keep in mind, I am just using information that I'm getting from NFL.com. This is their list of big acquisitions and big losses for these teams. So those are just some of the losses for Baltimore. And again, I mean, I'm just thinking of the rest of that team, though, that they're keeping there. And I still don't see how they really lose kind of the grip, the stranglehold on this division, because, and I'll get a little bit more into this with the rest of the teams, I don't see how Pittsburgh gets any better from really 8-8, 9-7, that area. Cleveland should improve greatly, but I don't think they'll get to a 14-2 or 13 win level. I don't see them picking up seven extra wins based on who they've picked up versus who they've lost in free agency so far. And then with Cincinnati, there's such a question mark, a huge question mark at the quarterback position, and really at the rest of that team. I don't see them getting so much better that they challenge for the division, even if they go out and draft Joe Burrow or another one of the top quarterbacks in this draft if they trade down and go for someone else. I don't see them getting that much better just from the draft. It's not like they're Miami. It's not like they have 20 some odd picks in this draft. They just have almost a regular amount. The kicker is that they have the first pick, and that gives them a lot of flexibility. The Bengals can, take Burrow, who that's kind of what everybody expects is for the Bengals to just take Joe Burrow. Or, I mean, they could even trade down for another team that really likes Burrow. I could easily see them trading down and deciding, okay, well, what all can we get? We can get a high first round draft pick and maybe another first round draft pick or a second. It depends on what the other teams want and what they're willing to give up to really get up there and get that number one pick. So that's kind of where I see the division as a whole for next season. But again, we haven't gone through some of these other moves. And of course, we do have the draft coming up. So we're going to move on to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh was the second ranked team in the AFC North last season. Excuse me. They were 8-8. And this is another team that they've got a big question mark. They have a question mark at quarterback because for the most part last season, the guy that everybody's seen from them for the last 2 decades, Ben Roethlisberger, just didn't play. He was hurt a lot of the year. He was out for a long time. And the guys that they put in to back him up or to replace him, they didn't perform either. I mean, you had Duck Hodges, and I can't even remember the other guy, the guy that got his head bashed in by Myles Garrett. And I mean, they didn't perform either. And that's kind of a shame. So we'll see kind of where they go if they decide to make any moves on the offensive side of the ball. But the additions that they've made there haven't been many. Mason Rudolph, that's it. Thank you, Bailey. Mason Rudolph, yes. Can we just call him Dented for now? Because I think that's probably a good enough name for him after that bashing. But again, I don't think that they think Rudolph or Duck Hodges is the solution for their next quarterback of the future. And the fact that they even pulled out one and plugged in the other and then went back, I think that shows that they're not confident in either of those quarterbacks either. And Ben Roethlisberger's health, even though he took a year off, again, that's got to be a question mark for them. So the additions that they've made, really, they franchise tagged Bud Dupree, great edge rusher, strong linebacker. I mean, he can really play anywhere in that front seven, if you ask me. He can play on the line and get around a tackle, or he can kind of sit back behind and play more of a zone D. And for me, this next move is probably the biggest for Pittsburgh because this just gives them another great weapon. Eric Ebron from the Colts. He's a big, fast tight end. He might be a little bit undersized for some people for the blocking, but for a receiving tight end, he's extremely fast. He's got great hands. He's signing a 2-year deal with the Steelers at only $6 million a year. I think that's kind of a steal for them. Derek Watt, the fullback. This is the middle brother, I believe, of the Watt trio in the NFL. Signed a 3-year deal in Pittsburgh. I think he'll be good. I'm not sure how he'll fit into that offense, but I think he'll be a fine addition. Chris Wormley, like we said earlier, he was acquired via trade from Baltimore. So Wormley and a 7th-round pick in 2021 went to Pittsburgh, and they gave up a 2021 5th-round pick. So a lot of that that give and take there was for futures. It really won't affect anything with this draft, and I don't think it'll really affect much for next season. Wormley will probably end up backing up for the Steelers. And the last major acquisition for the Steelers was Stefan Wisniewski, offensive lineman. I think he'll probably end up starting for this team, but I'm not sure how big of a difference it'll make for the Steelers' offensive line. They already have an incredibly strong offensive line. The fact that Roethlisberger got hurt, I think he's got a little bit more fragile now. I mean, he's getting older. He's always played this, big stand up in the pocket, move around a little bit if you need to style of play. I mean, he's taken some licks because of it. And I mean, at the same time, with the Mason Rudolph situation that I kind of mentioned earlier, that really wasn't on the offensive line. I mean, Myles Garrett is probably one of the best defensive ends in football. He's extremely quick. He's very strong. He just got around the edge, and the rest is kind of history. They did take a couple losses, but I don't think that they're really going to make much of a difference. They lost Nick Vannett. He went to the Broncos. Eric Ebron comes in, essentially a direct replacement. Offensive lineman B.J. Finney goes to the Seahawks. Wisniewski comes in, kind of a direct replacement. Tackle Javon Hargrave goes to the Eagles. Chris Wormley gets brought in on the as a trade. And these other ones are, I'd say, not that big of a deal, if you ask me. Anthony Chickillo leaves. He's an outside linebacker, excuse me. Artie Burns goes to the Bears, corner, and Mark Barron, the safety, also leaves. Chickillo and Barron don't have teams right now, but with Bud Dupree staying and being as good as he is, with Watt staying on that defensive side of the ball, TJ, that is, not Derek, staying, I really don't think that they're going to be hurting much for depth when it comes to edge rushers or linebackers. Now, they could work on their secondary, and again, we have to keep in mind the draft is coming up. There is going to be a lot of moving parts during the draft. I could certainly see Pittsburgh trying their hand at getting another defensive player, probably another player in the secondary. This is a pretty deep draft, if you ask me, when it comes to a lot of the skill positions, be that wide receiver. And I mean, to me, skill positions on the defensive side of the ball are your secondary and your linebackers. And there's a good couple. I know he probably won't fall, but you've got the kid out of Ohio State. He'll be coming out. A couple of them from LSU. It'll be a deep draft, and I think they won't necessarily have their pick of the group, but they'll definitely have some talent to be gained later in the draft. So with that, we're going to go to Cleveland. And Cleveland last year was one of those teams that really irritated me. They went 6-10. It's one of those things where they just have so much talent on the offensive side of the ball. And it seemed like they had a lot of defense or a lot of defensive talent as well. They just couldn't really put it all together. And whether they had a different coach, Freddie Kitchens was the coach after winning a good couple games with them as an interim. It'll be interesting to see how they play. I'm not sure is my thing. There's a lot of uncertainty with this team just after last season, where they have as much talent as you can really put on a team, especially on the offense, and then them perform so poorly. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with their offensive line. And through free agency, it's looked like they've tried their best to get out there and work on that offensive line. They picked up Jack Conklin. He signed a 3-year contract. A 3-year contract, $30 million guaranteed to go to Cleveland from Tennessee. He'll immediately step in and be their starting right tackle. I mean, he's probably one of the best tackles in the NFL right now. He should do a great job protecting Baker Mayfield, who took a ton of sacks last year. But they're going to need a blindside blocker, and I don't think Conklin is that. I think he's a right tackle. That's just the position he's played this entire time, playing across from Taylor Lewan in Tennessee. Wow. But I do think he will definitely shore up that offensive line greatly. They also brought in Andrew Billing, signing a 1-year contract. BJ Goodson, another 1-year deal. This one is a little bit puzzling to me. They sign Austin Hooper, tight end, awesome tight end. I loved watching him play in Atlanta. He was great there. But it's confusing to me because the Browns already have talent at that position. They already have David Njoku. So it will be weird. It's a little bit strange, if you ask me, the fact that they signed Hooper. And it's not just the fact that they signed him at all. It's the contract they gave him. 4 years, $42 million, $23 million guaranteed. That's a ton of money for any position, let alone a tight end. I mean, I think it's a bit much, but he's extremely talented. He'll give them a lot more options on the offensive side of the ball. It'll let them run 2 tight end sets. It'll be interesting to see. Kareem Hunt got a second round tender as a restricted free agent. Andy Janovich came in from the Broncos. He was traded to Cleveland for a 7th round pick in 2021. Corner Kevin Johnson came in on a 1-year, $3.5 million deal. It's got a max value of 6, so that means there are some incentives. Carl Joseph, a safety, another player in the secondary, 1-year deal. Case Keenum on a 3-year deal with $10 million guaranteed. I'm not sure what Cleveland was thinking necessarily with that. If they expect Keenum to come in and present some sort of challenge to Baker Mayfield, I don't see that as the case. I don't know why he got a 3-year deal necessarily to be a backup, but that's what he got. And I guess that's kind of it for him. Andrew Sendejo coming in on a 1-year deal as well. And the losses, again, this is one of those things where you look at this and it seems like they're just trying to replace a bunch of their losses with players they're bringing in. They're trying to not necessarily build naturally this team. They're trying to build it through free agency and just kind of throw money at some problems. So they lost Drew Stanton. They lost their backup quarterback. They bring in Case Keenum. They lose Rashard Higgins. They didn't bring in a wide receiver so far through free agency. They lose Demetrius Harris. They bring in Austin Hooper. I mean, I think that's an upgrade if you ask me. Austin Hooper has been very productive, especially with catching passes in Atlanta. They lose Christian Kirksey to the Packers. Did they bring in a linebacker? Yeah, they did. They brought in BJ Goodson. But thing is, that's not the only linebacker they lost. So they lost Joe Schobert. He went to the Jags. They lose cornerback TJ Carey. They bring in Kevin Johnson. Lose Eric Murray to the Texans. They bring in Sendejo and Joseph. And they lose Damaris Randall. And like I said, they brought in multiple safeties. Thing is, not all of these are lateral moves. Whereas with Pittsburgh, I feel like a lot of the moves that they made through free agency were very lateral. A lot of these signings were pretty much just plug and play players where you just need to, if one goes out, you have the depth. You just take it out, plug another one back in. Thing is, I'm not sure that BJ Goodson is as good as Joe Schobert or even Kirksey for that matter. Plus, you're losing multiple. I mean, if you lose more than one linebacker and you don't already have the depth there, you probably need someone else there to really fill in that spot. Now, with that said, the Browns are gonna draft on the defensive side of the ball. They really don't need anybody on the offensive side of the ball, as far as I can tell, apart from offensive line. They've got the wide receivers. They've got Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry, and then other receivers. Now they have Austin Hooper. They already had David Njoku, a very athletic tight end that you could very well just put him in the slot. He presents a mismatch no matter where you put him with his size and his ability. Same with Hooper for that matter. And then you've got, as much as I hate to say it, Kareem Hunt is a very talented player. I don't necessarily like him as a person, but he's a very talented running back. And they also have Nick Chubb. I don't see where else this Browns team goes in the draft apart from offensive line. Probably edge. Their front seven could always use some work, apart from Myles Garrett. Maybe even secondary, but it seems like they seem comfortable shoring up their secondary with some depth players from free agency. All right. And now we get to the last team of the division, the Cincinnati Bengals. Last year, the worst team in the NFL, 2-14. So far, they really haven't made many additions. They haven't picked up many players, and they've lost a couple. They've lost some starting players, and they've brought in some starting players. But I don't think that this is necessarily equal. So far they brought in Mackenzie Alexander, a corner, coming in on a 1-year, $4 million deal. They bring in Von Bell from the Saints, the safety, agrees to a 3-year contract, $7 million in year 1. So it's kind of front loaded. And I think that's their biggest pickup so far. That's just me. They picked up a quote better player. They picked up someone for more money that we'll get to. They've put the franchise tag on AJ Green. I figured that's the the only way that you keep him in Cincinnati, just after how futile and just not good they've been over the last probably 3-4 years. They bring in DJ Reader, the defensive lineman, on a 4-year, $53 million deal. And they also bring in Trey Waynes, a corner, on a 3-year, $42 million deal. Now, Cincinnati is like Miami, kind of in that they need a lot of stuff and they have a lot of money. So DJ Reader and Trey Waynes, immediate starters on this team. They're awesome. Von Bell, same thing. AJ Green staying. And Mackenzie Alexander, I think he's more of a depth pickup. But in my opinion, just based on the way the team was last year, I think them picking up Von Bell and Trey Waynes, those are probably the two most impactful pickups they've gotten. DJ Reader will certainly be good for this team, and he is definitely an upgrade over the player that they're losing. But I feel like the Bengals secondary was so bad. I'm just going to say it. It was not good. It was pretty bad last year. And Von Bell, Trey Waynes, Mackenzie Alexander, like I said, he'll probably be backing up second string or just a depth player. But Waynes and Bell are immediate starters. They immediately help that secondary. And I see Bailey, I know you're watching. You commented earlier, and I know you're a big Saints fan. What do you think of Bell leaving the Saints? Do you think that's a super huge deal for the Saints? Because I know that their defense is something that years past it's gotten better, but the Saints usually are a team that rely on their offense. But in the meantime, while hopefully he gets back to me on that quick question, I can run through the losses for. Yeah, I get that, definitely. It is a big loss, but they do need to make some room, especially for the cap. It's probably more of a cap thing. Well, okay. I also follow the Giants, so Eli Apple wasn't necessarily as bad for the Saints as I think he was for the Giants. Actually, I don't know. Eli Apple's just not very good, is he? He's kind of just a walking offense or defensive pass interference, isn't he? Yeah, not great, not a great cover corner, but yeah, losing Bell, that is sad, but I think that's more of a cap thing than a quality of player kind of thing. But back to the Bengals, yeah. Back to the Bengals. Enough about the Saints. We'll get to them, Bailey. We'll get to them. I'll let you know when we're doing them. Probably next week. Either later this week or next week. Because after this, we have one more division in the AFC, but we'll be getting to the NFC. So the losses for the Bengals, they lost Tyler Eifert, Cordy Glenn, John Miller, Andrew Billings. Billings actually went to the Browns. Eifert went to the Jags. Offensive lineman Cordy Glenn, tackle. There we go. Cordy Glenn, I think, is probably one of the bigger losses for the Cincinnati team. He's just been kind of a mainstay on that offensive line for a little while, and as far as I can tell, they haven't picked up anybody to replace him. John Miller went to the Panthers, another offensive lineman. Andrew Billings, like I said earlier, went to the Browns. Corners, B.W. Webb and Darquise Dennard, also no longer with the team, but again, though I think those players are probably replacement level players. And then, that's a name. Clayton Fejadellum, I want to say. Clayton Fejadellum. Let's go with that. Sorry if I butchered that name. That's on me. Went down to Miami to play for the Dolphins. A lot of those losses really aren't that big a deal, especially when you look at the pickups. So, Eifert, as talented as he was his first year or two in the NFL, he hasn't been impactful the last couple of years. He's been injury prone. He hasn't been able to stay on the field. And even when he has been on the field, he really hasn't been getting targets. Cordy Glenn and John Miller, both those players will hurt certainly for the Cincinnati offensive line. But again, they've got some high draft picks. They'll be drafting high in every round pretty much. And I think they'll be able to shore up that offensive line. As for Dennard and Webb and even Fejedelum, like I said, they picked up Bell, Alexander, and Waynes. The thing with this Cincinnati team is what they do with the number one pick. Of course, everybody's going to say, "Oh, they need to stay. They need to stay at one. They need to take their next quarterback. They need to take Joe Burrow. He's from Ohio." I know that storyline's been played out by everybody, but if he does go there, will he even have protection? I know he'll have at least one weapon in AJ Green. He'll have some other wide receivers to throw to, but will he have time to throw to them? I mean, look at this LSU team. They didn't have the best offensive line, but they certainly had an offensive line that it was fine. It was serviceable. He had time to make throws when he needed them, and when he had to roll out, he still delivered. That's what made him the best quarterback in college football this year. But when you get to the NFL level, everybody gets a bit faster. Your receivers get faster, your running backs get faster, but at the same time, defenses get faster. Schemes start getting a little bit more complicated. Now, Burrow succeeded last year, but that was really his only year with a high level of success. Now, Jordan Palmer, his kind of personal quarterback coach, pretty much gave him the stamp of approval, said, yes, he's got what it takes to make it at the next level. That's awesome and all. And Joe Brady, immediately, he's already back in the NFL. Joe Brady is the offensive coordinator now in Carolina working with Matt Rule, and he was the offensive coordinator that really got the best out of Joe Burrow last season. But again, it's kind of one of those things where he's had limited success at the college level. What tells you about him? Now, I think, what does that tell you about him going into the NFL is basically what I'm trying to ask. It's that, even without that sustained success, does he have the talent to make it in the NFL? What has he shown that which tells you that he'll make it in the NFL? If you ask me, I'm not looking at any of his combine stats, anything like that. I mean, he didn't do everything. Hand size, he's got small hands. That's not a big deal, especially when you look at the level of success he had last year. And for me, it isn't necessarily how successful he was that makes him the number one pick to me. It's just how he did it, how consistently good he was. This wasn't he goes off one game for, 6 touchdowns and however many yards in this one game. He had 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 a game pretty much the entire year, even going to the championship game. He played incredibly in that game. He threw the ball when he needed to, where he needed to, and the ball that he threw had touch. It was accurate. He can throw it in. He can thread a needle. That's pretty much what I'm saying. He throws the ball so well, and he has such a good presence. Now, to kind of close the show out, sorry, this one is a little bit maybe on the shorter side. I mean, it's still getting towards 35 minutes. I kind of want to look at the AFC North as a whole, and then kind of re-break down, reseed them for next season, and just kind of looking at the top of it. Again, Baltimore. I don't see Baltimore moving. They might not win 14 games next year. Teams might have seen kind of what Tennessee did, where they kind of stacked the box, bring the rush heavy, and that might help neutralize Lamar Jackson. But even against Tennessee, it didn't do it completely. I mean, Lamar still had a fine game. So I don't think Baltimore loses their grip on the division, especially with them picking up players for the defensive side of the ball. And looking at the rest of the division, Pittsburgh, again, it's their quarterback position to me. Whether they decide to stick with Rudolph or stick with Duck Hodges or see kind of how Roethlisberger plays next year, that's still to be seen. Or I mean, they could draft someone that they think has what it takes. Be that there are a couple. I don't think that they'll be taking a quarterback first round. There still should be some talent later on that they could pick from. Be that this is just me. I don't see Jordan Love as a first round quarterback. I don't see Jacob Eason as a first round quarterback. But those two guys definitely have talent. I mean, you could even see them possibly going for Jalen Hurts. From what I've seen, Jalen Hurts is supposed to slip or fall till probably third, fourth round. What do you guys think in the chat? What do you guys think of maybe Jalen Hurts suiting up for the Steelers? His skill set working with a strong offensive line like that. I think that they'll need to kind of take their former quarterback position and go from a player that stands in the pocket. And I think they need to really work on getting someone with some mobility, going to a player that has the ability to break plays open if they need to, because it seems like the last couple of years, even last year with the two younger guys, they haven't had a quarterback that's mobile in, like I said, 2 decades. Okay, you think Jordan Love would be better in Pittsburgh? I could see that. I'm a big fan of Jordan Love, but at the same time, like I said, I'm not necessarily sure that he's a first round quarterback to me, just because kind of the same reason that I had with Joe Burrow. Jordan Love has limited success at the college level, but he's got all the physical tools and definitely the highlight reel to show for it. Now that's Jordan Love, the quarterback at Utah State. Yeah, I mean, he was awesome there. And the thing is, another thing with Pittsburgh picking him up, Love, as far as I know, before the combine, had some off the field issues that they might not want to touch, especially, after the whole Antonio Brown and Le'Veon Bell kind of situation the last couple years. But that said, I mean, I expect a lot of these young quarterbacks to succeed. Picking up a quarterback third or fourth round, then dropping Duck or yeah, I could see that third or fourth round. They'll just have to take a look and see what players are there. I mean, I could see Jalen Hurts, quarterback from Oklahoma. Yeah, of course, that all this does come down to whether they decide to draft or if Big Ben retires. Now, from what I've heard, I don't think Big Ben is going to retire this year, but just based on how fragile he's been the last couple of years, especially with that elbow, I could see that coming sooner than later. And I think that it would be smart of Pittsburgh to try and start thinking of who they want for the future. Let's see. Cleveland, that's the thing. With these two teams in the middle, even if they go out and get, I understand that with the number 1 pick, you expect Cincinnati to immediately get better. And I'm not sure they do. That's my thing. I don't know if they'll have enough around Joe Burrow or whoever they have to substantially, improve. But I could definitely see Cleveland improving, especially with them shoring up their offensive line already. If they can get their offensive line even a little bit better through the draft, I could definitely see Cleveland probably taking the 2nd seed in the AFC North, but I'm not going to secure them a playoff spot just yet. Even with all that talent up front, I think their secondary could still use some work, and their offensive line could certainly use some work. And again, Cincinnati, even with Burrow, I think with them losing Cordy Glenn and not getting any of the offensive linemen from free agency, I'm trying to look. So that's the thing. They lose Cordy Glenn, they lose John Miller, and they don't even go out and get, I'm just thinking some of the guys that have already been signed and we've already talked about. I mean, look, the Jets went out and got 3 offensive linemen. Shoot, like, they go out and get Greg Van Roten, and, excuse me, there was one more. Let me see if I can find him. Connor McGovern. Shoot, and Alex Lewis. Josh Andrews as well. Like, the Jets went out and got 4 offensive linemen this offseason to help their young quarterback. Now, if you ask me, Cincinnati probably should have done the same thing. Cleveland, instead of going out and getting multiple, they go out and get the guy. They go out and get the best offensive lineman in this year's free agency, Jack Conklin. The Bengals didn't do any of that. I don't know if they expect to go out and get all of them in the draft. If they do, I don't think that's a good idea. I think a lot of the young offensive linemen coming into the NFL right now need a lot of work. There aren't many sure things. The last couple sure things we've gotten were, was Quentin Nelson. And if you look at him, the way he played in college, he was honestly probably the best player in that draft. The only reason he doesn't go 1 or 2 is the fact that he's an offensive lineman, and a lot of teams don't expect them to have the same level of impact as an edge rusher, as a quarterback, or a position like that. And I think that's where Cincinnati is going wrong right now, is them not picking up offensive linemen. So the way I've got the AFC North panning out next year, Baltimore at 1, I think they regress just a touch. Instead of 14 wins, maybe they get 12. Maybe they get 13. Cleveland coming in at 2, I think they do improve. And I think that through the draft, they get, even that much better. Pittsburgh coming in at 3rd, I think they either stay at 8-8 or even regress a little bit, depending on their quarterback play. And as much as I like Joe Burrow, and as much as I enjoyed watching him play in college this past year and dominating the college ranks, I have him in the Cincinnati Bengals, excuse me, being the caboose of this division, coming in last of the AFC North. I think they get better, but I don't think that they've done enough to get better. So that is my Monday show. That's all I've got for you guys today. On Wednesday, we will be taking on the AFC West, last one. That one should be interesting because, one of those teams won the Super Bowl, and, well, they haven't really done much since then. So until then, I'm in George Giro. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And also, I just see the chat. I hope everybody's staying safe. And thank you, Bailey, for, being here and participating. Thank you so much. And again, I hope everybody is out there staying inside, staying safe, and I'll see you guys on Wednesday.